Welcome. I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. Today we'll talk about the astrology of COVID-19 in India. First off, I wanted to say thank you to all of my patrons. I really appreciate all that you do, all of your support, wonderful feedback, and interaction. I really couldn't and wouldn't have done this without you. If you would like to become a patron and get access to astrological videos, astrological magic materials and discussions, and at the highest tier, my monthly magical elections electional document, please go to patreon.com/Nina Griffin. All right, let's get started. Now, 2021 was always going to be a tough year for the pandemic, thanks to the Saturn-Uranus square. These planets always bring an epidemic or a new disease when they meet. And this was certainly the case almost over 100 years ago in 1918 when they opposed each other 5 times. The Saturn-Uranus opposition occurred 5 times over a period of over 2 years. And of course, we got the worldwide flu pandemic at that time. Now, we are not quite so unfortunate this time. They only meet 3 times in 2021. They will square in February, June, and December. So we are very lucky it's not more because, of course, if they meet 5 times, it just prolongs the situation because it takes a lot longer for them to meet 5 times than 3. Now, when Saturn last opposed Uranus in 2008 through 2010, we got the novel swine flu. It was a new variant of the flu, the H1N1. It was a variant of H1N1, and people didn't have antibodies, so it was very virulent. We were quite lucky it didn't turn into a pandemic of the kind that we are dealing with now, but it wasn't too far off. And so you can see that whenever these planets meet, there is always a possibility of a new disease or an old disease coming back with greater potency. Now in 2020, as you may recall, we had the meeting of Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in Capricorn, which basically kicked off the pandemic. And then this year, in 2021, the Saturn-Uranus square continues it. So this raises a question of why did India get impacted as much as it did and when it did? Now, obviously, there are a lot of non-astrological factors. It's always tougher for larger countries with big populations to contain diseases just because it's hard to control and direct a large number of people. The logistics are very difficult. In addition, India is a developing country, which adds another layer of difficulty in terms of infrastructure and the availability of healthcare. Still, I do wonder about what is the sign that's assigned to India and why was it so triggered in 2021? Historically, the astrologer Manilius assigned the sign of Gemini to India, but Ptolemy, who is of course much more famous and prominent, gave it to Capricorn. Certainly, Capricorn I think is a possibility. We see echoes of it in the 1950 Proclamation of the Republic horoscope. Capricorn culminates, Mercury's in Capricorn in that chart. And then of course in 2020 we did get that Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto pileup in Capricorn, which did impact the 10th house. However, my personal theory, just based on what I've observed, is that India is ruled by one of the fixed signs. I am not sure as to which one it is, but Taurus seems like a good choice, given that it's the sign of the bull. Now, in that 1950 chart, Aquarius and Taurus are particularly emphasized. And if you go back to looking at other horoscopes of India, the fixed signs are always very, very prominent, which makes me think that maybe there is a fixed house polarity to which India seems to respond very strongly. Now, recall that Jupiter and Saturn conjoin in Aquarius in December, which usually means big changes politically, socially, as well as natural disasters and epidemics. And this will impact countries that have a strong Aquarius influence, that respond strongly to the sign Aquarius. Now, obviously, Jupiter and Saturn are no longer exactly conjunct, but they are still in the same sign, and then they will continue to be in that sign through much of 2021. So anything that conjunction began in December is going to really persist through the end of this year. Getting back to the 1950 chart, it's thought to have been astrologically elected, with the Sun, Jupiter, and Venus all conjunct in Aquarius in the auspicious 11th house. This chart has many positive features, including the Moon in her exaltation in Taurus. The Moon, of course, rules the people. But no horoscope can be perfect, and the malefic planets have to be somewhere in the chart. And here we've got Saturn retrograde in the double-bodied sign Virgo in the 6th house of disease, which makes illness a recurrent problem that comes and goes and is hard to eradicate in any country that would have this particular placement. Now, the sun rules the 6th house of illness, and it makes an exact square to the moon exalted in Taurus in the 1st house of the nation's overall well-being. The Saturn-Uranus square this year was at 7 Taurus and 7 Aquarius, which triggers that natal sun-moon square exactly. So you can see how some of these big aspects, when they trigger a particular sensitive point or configuration in the natal chart of a country, they will bring that promise to life at that time. And that seems to be what has happened to India this year. You know, from an astrological perspective, one reason that places like India that did quite well in keeping COVID at bay in 2020 started to run into problems later on is because of the big change in astrological emphasis that occurred in late 2020. We went from having all of the astrological action in 2020 in cardinal signs to a major switch in late 2020 into fixed signs, namely Aquarius and Taurus. Jupiter and Saturn entered Aquarius. Uranus, of course, was right there in Taurus, and so that triggered that square that we are dealing with now for the remainder of 2021. Now, because India's horoscope is so strongly emphasizing the fixed signs, that's the reason that 2020 was not so bad for India. But again, once those fixed signs were triggered, we started to get a lot more problems and there was just a lot less room for error. Because of this, the way that I look at India going forward is I think that India will continue to struggle with COVID on and off for the remainder of 2021 as that Saturn-Uranus square continues, as it waxes and wanes. The good news is that once that square separates in December, the situation will continue to improve. Now, I do think that there could be a partial resurgence of COVID in the fall of 2022, and not just in India, but in a number of locations. What happens then is that Saturn and Uranus again get within a few degrees of perfecting that square, but they don't quite get to perfection. So because of that, I think that next fall, 2022, could bring back some resurgence of COVID, and certainly India would have to be concerned because this still happens in fixed signs. Nonetheless, I would say that 2022 looks a lot brighter for India than 2021. I would say if you are also a patron, I would recommend that you take a look at my global forecast for 2021 for the Aries ingress. I made that a couple of months ago, and I do talk about India and some of the indications that are in India's chart for this particular year. You can get that at patreon.com/Nina Griffin. All right, thanks for watching. I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel.